I remember the day I met Mark like it was yesterday. It was my 30th birthday, and I felt pretty good about where I was in life. I worked as a project manager at a tech firm, a job I loved not just for the work, but also for the people I worked with. That day, however, brought someone new into the mix. I walked into the office, coffee in hand, and saw everyone huddled around a tall, dark-haired guy by the water cooler. That was Mark, the new guy in marketing. I remember thinking he seemed a bit cocky, standing there with a smirk, telling some story that had everyone laughing. "Hey, Emily, meet Mark. He's joining us for the big project," my colleague Sarah said, waving me over. Mark turned and flashed me a grin that caught me off guard. "So, you're the birthday girl and the brains of this operation. Nice to meet you, Emily," Mark said. I rolled my eyes, not quite sure what to make of him. "Brains? Yes. Birthday girl? Unfortunately, yes. Let's hope you're more than just the charming guy by the water cooler," I replied. He laughed, and I couldn't help but smile. "Challenge accepted," he said. Despite our bickering, we made a great team. It wasn't long before our late-night work sessions turned into late-night chats about everything and nothing. Mark had a way of making me laugh even when the stress was piling on. One evening as we were wrapping up, he stopped and looked at me with a serious expression. "You know, Emily, I've worked at a lot of places, but there's something about this team, about you, that's different. It feels like home." I felt my cheeks heat up, not sure what to say. "Well, this team is pretty special, and you're not too bad yourself," I replied. That was the start of it all. Late nights turned into dinners, and dinners turned into weekends spent together. Our colleagues weren't blind. Whispers and nudges followed us around, but we didn't care. We were in our little bubble, happy. Even Mr. Henderson, our stern, no-nonsense boss, seemed to soften when it came to us. I remember the day he called me into his office, a rare smile on his usually serious face. "Emily, I've seen a lot of office romances come and go, but you and Mark, there's something solid there. Just don't screw up the project, all right?" he said, half joking. I laughed, feeling warmth in my heart. "Don't worry, Mr. Henderson. We've got the project and this," I replied, a feeling of contentment settling in. Then came our wedding day. It was perfect, with our families, friends, and colleagues all there to share in our joy. Mr. Henderson's speech brought tears to my eyes, not just for his kind words, but for the look of pride on his face. 2 whole years had whizzed past since Mark and I said our "I do." Living in the house I grew up in, now ours, felt like we were building something special. Mark's touch turned the place from a house to a home. His care and affection showed in the little things, the notes he'd leave on the fridge, the surprise weekend getaways, or how he'd dance with me in the living room to no music at all. Mark's recent promotion at work was a big deal. He came home that day with a wide grin, holding a bottle of fancy wine we'd been saving. "Guess who's the new sales director?" He beamed, popping the cork. I jumped into his arms, laughing. "I knew they'd see how amazing you are. We need to celebrate." As we clinked glasses, I couldn't help but feel proud. Mark was more than just a smooth talker. He had a knack for making people feel seen and heard. But sometimes I wondered if I was still fully in that picture. Mark's parents, Ted and Martha, were a hoot, loud, loving, and in our business more than I'd admit. Every Sunday dinner turned into an inquisition about grandkids. "So, Emily, Mark, what's the holdup? We're not getting any younger, and we need little feet running around." Martha would nudge, her eyes gleaming with expectation. Mark would just chuckle, throwing a glance my way. "Mom, Dad, we're just savoring the newlywed life, aren't we, Em?" I'd force a smile, my mind racing back to the little hesitations and slight stutters when we brushed on the topic alone. One chilly evening, the house was quiet, the kind of silence that begs for tough questions. I found Mark on the porch, his eyes fixed on the stars. Mark, can we talk about us? About kids? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't turn, just nodded slowly. Sure, Em. What's on your mind? I hesitated, the words heavy on my tongue. Do you really see us starting a family? I mean, it's okay if you're not ready, but I need to know we're on the same page. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. Em, I love you, you know that. And yeah, I want kids, but not yet. Work's crazy, and we've barely had time to be us. Let's just enjoy this a bit longer, okay? His words hung in the air, a mix of reassurance and something else, something like distance. I wanted to believe him, to dive into his embrace and forget my worries. But the way he wouldn't meet my eye, the way his voice wavered, it stuck with me. Dinners with Ted and Martha kept the question of grandkids on the table. Each time, Mark's answers felt more rehearsed, his smile a bit strained. One Sunday, as Martha brought it up again, I watched Mark closely. You know, Mark, a little one would mean the world to your mom and dad, I prodded gently. Mark's fork paused midair. Yeah, I know, Em. And it will happen, just not right this second. There's plenty we've got to figure out first. Ted chimed in, his voice booming as always. Son, life's short. Don't keep putting off the good stuff for some perfect moment that might never come. Mark forced a laugh, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I hear you, Dad, but trust me, it's all about timing. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when my world began to crumble. I had been feeling off for a while, a nagging fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix. Mark noticed, too, his furrowed brows showing his worry even if he didn't say it out loud. Em, you sure you're okay? You've been looking kind of pale, Mark said one morning as we shared a quiet breakfast. I tried to brush it off with a weak smile. Just a bit run down, I guess. Nothing a good day's rest won't fix. But the rest didn't help, and deep down I knew something wasn't right. The day I finally decided to see the doctor, I could feel Mark's tension, his usually steady hands fumbling with the car keys. The clinic was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth of our home. Sitting there, waiting for test results, every second felt like an eternity. When the doctor finally called us in, his face was somber. His words hit like a heavy blow. Emily, the tests have come back, and I'm afraid it's leukemia. The room spun. Leukemia. How could that be? I looked at Mark, expecting him to be my rock, but instead I saw him stagger, his face the color of the whitewashed walls. Doc, there's got to be some mistake. Em's strong, she's healthy. This can't be right, Mark stammered, his voice barely a whisper. The doctor's eyes were kind but firm. I'm truly sorry, but we need to start treatment immediately. Time is crucial here. The ride home was silent, the air thick with unsaid fears and unshed tears. Mark was there, but his presence felt distant, like he was retreating into a shell I couldn't penetrate. The following weeks were a blur of hospital rooms, IV drips, and the constant beeping of machines. I was fighting the biggest battle of my life, but it felt like I was fighting it alone. Mark's visits became sporadic, his excuses flimsy. Work's slammed, Em, you know how it is, but I'm here for you always, he'd say, his gaze drifting to the clock more often than meeting my eyes. I wanted to scream, to shake him and wake him up to our reality, but the fight was draining me, leaving me too tired for anger, too weak for confrontation. One evening, as I lay in the hospital bed, my body weary and my heart heavy, I caught a glimpse of the Mark I used to know. He sat by my side, holding my hand like he used to, but even his touch felt different. Em, talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours? He asked, his voice low. I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I married. I need you, Mark, not just the version of you that shows up and nods along. I'm scared and I feel like you're not really here with me. He flinched as if my words were physical blows. I am here, Em. It's just, this place, the sickness, It's a lot to handle. But I'm not going anywhere, okay? His words were meant to comfort, but they felt hollow, rehearsed. The distance between us was growing, the connection we once had fraying at the edges. The hospital room, with its constant beeps and sterile smell, became my new normal. But that day, something was off. It wasn't the usual unease of being sick. It was something deeper, a gut feeling that something was about to shatter my already fragile world. I was half dozing when I heard the door creak. Mark slipped in, his footsteps hesitant. I kept my eyes closed, feigning sleep, a part of me not ready to face another hollow conversation. Then I heard it, the soft buzz of his phone. His voice, usually so warm towards me, was different now, hushed and laced with excitement. "No, baby, she's asleep. I can talk," he whispered, and my heart froze. Baby? He never called me that. My breath hitched, and every fiber of my being screamed to confront him, but I forced myself to stay still, to listen. "Yeah, it's tough, but what can I do?" "Just waiting for this whole mess to be over," he continued, and I felt a sting in my chest. This whole mess, was that what our life, our love, had been reduced to? I heard a soft laugh from him, one that used to be reserved for our inside jokes. "Oh, the inheritance. Yeah, it's all sorted. The house, the savings. It'll all be mine soon enough. Just got to play the part a bit longer." Tears welled up in my eyes. The man I loved, the man I trusted with every piece of me, was plotting his future on my demise. I was nothing more than an obstacle in his path, a mess to clean up. The pain of betrayal was sharper than any needle, any treatment I had endured. "But babe, let's not talk about that now. Tell me what you're wearing," he murmured, and that's when I felt it, the rage burning through the fog of medication and despair. I wanted to leap up, to scream, to make him see the monster he had become. But my body was weak, my voice a mere shadow of its former self. All I could do was lie there, tears streaming silently, as I listened to the man I had vowed to spend my life with, weaving plans that didn't just exclude me, they relied on my death. After what felt like an eternity, he ended the call, planting a cold kiss on my forehead. "Sleep tight, Em. I'll see you tomorrow," he said, the deceit dripping from each word. The door clicked shut, and I was alone again. Truly alone. The room felt colder, the walls closing in. I was stuck in a nightmare, and the one person who was supposed to be my partner, my protector, was the one holding the knife to my heart. The morning after that chilling discovery, I knew I had to act fast. My first call was to Mike, my lawyer, who had always been more of a family friend than just a suit with a briefcase. "Mike, it's Emily. I need you here pronto. We need to change my will," I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for questions. He didn't hesitate. "I'm on it, Em. I'll be there today. We'll sort everything out." When Mike arrived, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "All right, Em, let's make sure everything you've worked for goes where you want it. No details needed. I trust you. Just tell me what you need." I laid out my wishes, ensuring Mark wouldn't see a dime of what I'd built. It was more than just securing my assets, it was taking back control. In the following days, I played my part well. Whenever Mark visited, I closed my eyes, feigning sleep, but under my blanket, my phone was recording every word he said. His voice, once filled with love, was now dripping with anticipation for a life without me, talking to his mistress about how they'd splash my hard-earned cash. The act was almost perfect until the day Dr. Adams came with a heavy heart. "Emily, I won't sugarcoat it. Without a bone marrow match, we're looking at a few months at best." I braced myself for Mark's reaction, but what I saw was a tiny, fleeting smirk that he quickly masked with a shocked expression. "That's terrible, Doctor. Are you sure there's no other option?" he said, his voice oozing fake concern. It was a performance worthy of an award, but I'd seen behind the curtain and the show meant nothing to me now. Just a couple of days later, Mark's true colors shone through even more. "Babe, work's calling. Big project out of state. I gotta leave for a month," he said, not a hint of hesitation in his voice. I looked at him, my heart hard as stone. "Sure, Mark. Business is business, right? Have a good trip," I replied, my voice steady, giving nothing away. He left with a quick peck on the cheek, a gesture so empty it might as well have been a handshake. But as the door shut behind him, I felt a surge of strength. He was playing his game, but I was making moves too. With Mark out of the picture, the hospital room felt less like a cage and more like a quiet space for battle. It was just me, the nurses with their silent nods of encouragement, and Dr. Adams, whose steady presence was a beacon of hope in the sterile sea of white. Then one bright morning, Dr. Adams burst in with a grin that stretched ear to ear. "Emily, you're not going to believe this. We found a match, a bone marrow donor. It's a chance, a real chance at a new start." The words hit me like a ray of sunlight in the dark. "Are you for real, Doc?" That's something else," I said. He nodded, his eyes twinkling with a mix of professionalism and genuine joy. "It's as real as it gets, Emily. We've got to move fast and prep you for the transplant. It's not going to be easy, but you're a fighter. I've seen it." That news was the turning point. It wasn't just a thread of hope. It was a lifeline pulling me back from the edge. But it wasn't just my health on the line. It was my entire life, a life that Mark had tried to steal away piece by piece. On the eve of the transplant, I lay there, the beeping monitors now a familiar chorus in the background. The road ahead was scary, sure, but each step felt like a step away from Mark's shadow and towards a life that was truly mine. Out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. Mark's name flashed on the screen, a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. "Hey, Em, how's it going? Just wanted to check in." His voice, once a source of comfort, now felt like a distant echo. "Just the usual, Mark. Battling on while you're off playing businessman," I replied, my voice sharp, leaving no room for his fake sympathy. There was a pause, a crack in his polished facade. "Em, I'm doing this for us, for our future. Just hang tight, okay?" I almost snorted. "Sure, Mark, you do what you have to. I'm doing what I need to do here." The call was short, his words empty, but I was no longer the Emily he thought he knew. I was stronger, ready to face the battle head-on. The day of the transplant dawned with a mix of anxiety and determination. The nurses were my quiet army, their words of encouragement my shield against fear. "You're the bravest person we know, Emily. You've got this," they said, their hands firm and reassuring. I nodded, feeling a newfound resolve. "Thanks. I'm not just fighting for my life anymore. I'm fighting for the life I deserve." As the meds kicked in, drawing me into darkness, my last thought was clear. I was turning the page, stepping into a future where I was not just a survivor, but a conqueror. The operation was a blur of lights and distant voices, but when I woke up, the world seemed different. The air felt lighter, my breath easier. Dr. Adams's smile said it all before his words did. "Emily, it's a success. You're on the mend." The news was a quiet victory, a moment so profound yet so personal I chose to keep it close. A secret not ready to be shared, not with Mark, not with his parents, not with anyone. This journey was mine, each step a testament to my will to survive and thrive. The hospital room was silent, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words and hidden truths. It had been a month since Mark left for his so-called business trip, a month of solitude, healing, and planning. When he finally returned, there was no rush to my bedside, no urgency in his step. That's when I knew it was time to play my final card. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Mark, it's time. I need to see you. I want to say goodbye and read my will." I whispered into the receiver, my words heavy with faint sorrow. He was there faster than I expected, his eyes scanning the room, looking for the dying wife he expected to find. I lay there frail and pale, a perfect picture of defeat, but inside I was anything but defeated. As he approached with a forced look of concern, I murmured, "Mark, there are others coming. Witnesses for the will." His face dropped, confusion and fear mingling in his eyes. "Witnesses? What are you talking about, Em?" The door opened, and in walked Ted and Martha, their faces etched with worry, followed by Mr. Henderson, his brow furrowed in a mix of concern and curiosity. Mark's voice trembled, betraying his composure. "Mom, Dad, Mr. Henderson, why are you here?" Ignoring his question, I reached for the remote, my finger steady, my resolve unwavering. The room fell into a hushed silence as I pressed play. Mark's own words began to fill the space, each syllable a nail in the coffin of the life he had so carefully constructed. His voice, so familiar yet now so foreign, spoke of waiting for my death, of the inheritance he'd claim, and of the lies he'd spun. He laughed at the expense of his parents, bragging about the money he'd swindled from them under the pretense of my treatment, money he'd squandered on lavish escapades with his mistress. He boasted about the funds he'd taken from Mr. Henderson, all while planning a future that banked on my demise. The recording ended, and the room was engulfed in stunned silence. Ted's face turned red with rage, his hands clenched into fists. You're nothing but a snake. We raised you without denying you anything, and this is how you repay us." Martha's tears flowed freely, her sobs a testament to the heartbreak of a mother betrayed. Mr. Henderson stood, his expression steely, the disappointment in his eyes more piercing than words could ever be. "Mark, I trusted you, supported you. You've not only lost your job, but expect a legal battle. You'll answer for every single penny." Mark's facade crumbled, his pleas for forgiveness, his attempts at justification, falling on deaf ears. "Please, it wasn't like that, I didn't mean," he stammered, but his words were lost, drowned in the sea of his own deceit. As the guards entered to escort him away, his cries and promises echoed hollowly against the walls of the room. The truth was laid bare, and the consequences were his alone to bear. The divorce papers had been filed, a clean cut from a man who turned out to be a stranger. "I want him out, Mike. Out of my life and out of my finances. He's not getting a dime," I said with newfound assertiveness, my lawyer nodding in agreement. "He won't, Emily. I'll make sure of that. We'll hit him with everything we've got. Treason doesn't pay," Mike assured me, his words a solid promise. Ted and Martha, once in-laws, now turned allies, had made their stance clear. "He's no son of ours, not anymore. We raised a boy, but somewhere along the way he turned into a monster," Ted said sternly, a mixture of anger and disappointment in his voice. Martha, her eyes still tinged with the hurt of betrayal, added, "We're with you, Emily, all the way. He fooled us all, but no more. Your family and we protect our own." Mr. Henderson, my ever-supportive boss, was a pillar of strength. "Emily, the moment you're ready, your job's waiting. And as for Mark, consider him gone. The company's already pressing charges for fraud. He'll pay for every penny he stole and then some." Mark's downfall was swift and complete. Fired from his job, his reputation in tatters, he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. His mistress, the woman he pinned his hopes and dreams on, turned her back the moment his pockets turned empty. A fitting end for a man who thought he could have it all by stepping over others. As for me, I lay there, the pieces of my broken life slowly coming back together. The wounds were still fresh but healing, a testament to the battles I faced and won. The road to recovery was long, but with each passing day my strength returned, a silent nod to the resilience that had carried me through the storm. "Emily, you're a fighter. Always have been, Mr. Henderson's words echoed in my mind, reminding me of the journey ahead. The company needs you, but more importantly, you need to take this time to heal, to rebuild. We'll be here whenever you're ready. I smiled, the gesture no longer foreign, a sign of the peace I'd found. I'll be back, Mr. Henderson. When I do, it'll be a fresh start, a new chapter. The room was quiet as I closed my eyes, the soft hum of the hospital a reminder of where I'd been and where I was heading. The journey had been harrowing, a test of will and strength, but as I lay there, a survivor of deceit and betrayal, I knew this was not the end of my story, but the start of something new, a chapter of healing, of justice, and of unwavering determination. The final act was over, but my story, my journey was just beginning.
The sound of Alex's voice sliced through the clatter of dishes like a sharp knife. "Alara, bring me some tea now." I paused, my hands submerged in soapy water. "Hold on, I'm doing the dishes." "What?" His tone was incredulous, laced with impatience. "Stop that and bring me the tea quickly. Can't you follow simple orders?" "But I started, only to be interrupted. "What a useless wife you are. Make me some sweet coffee, please." It was Mrs. Whitmore, my mother-in-law, speaking from the living room. She sat there, devouring a slice of cake she'd taken from the fridge, her eyes glinting with malice. I sighed, glancing at the mountain of dishes. "There are so many." "Leave them for later. Just do what we say, useless wife." Alex's voice was a whip, each word stinging. I was Alara, a 28-year-old working mother, trapped in a life that felt more like a prison than a home. Married at 23, I had hoped for love and companionship. Instead, I found myself in the clutches of Alex and his overbearing mother. Our son, only 4, was the sole source of joy in my bleak world. We lived in Alex's parents' house, a decision forced upon me under the guise of caring for Mrs. Whitmore after my father-in-law's passing. Initially, I sympathized with her supposed grief, but soon it became clear that I was nothing more than a pawn in her cruel game of domestic tyranny. Cooking, cleaning, working, it was never enough. My efforts were met with scorn, my meals left untouched or criticized harshly. "The stir-fry is so half-hearted," Mrs. Whitmore would scoff. "Cook it properly from scratch." "I'm busy and can only make simple things," I'd respond, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's why I hate backtalk from a daughter-in-law," she'd snap. "Cook from scratch? Why don't you cook then? You're a good cook, right?" I dared to retort once, immediately regretting it. "Why would I do housework when you're here?" Her response was cold, dismissive. "Are you out of your mind?" Their cruelty escalated over time, shifting from harsh words to a chilling silence. They began to ignore me completely, as if I were a ghost haunting my own home. My presence, once merely undervalued, now seemed entirely invisible. 5 years passed in this suffocating atmosphere. Alex and I turned 35 and 33, respectively. Our son grew, yet the oppressive air in the house remained unchanged. My mother-in-law, now 63, seemed to thrive on my misery. One evening, as I trudged home from work, a heavy realization settled over me. My existence seemed pointless in their eyes. I was a shadow, unseen and unheard. The only voice that acknowledged me was that of my son. The thought of losing even that small recognition was unbearable. Returning home, I began cooking immediately, trying to push away the gloom. I prepared mapo tofu, fried chicken, and a stir-fry with bell peppers and pork, hoping to bring some semblance of normalcy to our dinner. "Bring me the mayo," Alex commanded abruptly, breaking his long silence. "Sure, here you are," I replied, handing him the mayonnaise. His first words to me in ages were not of gratitude or conversation, but a mere order. It was the final straw, the breaking point of my patience and tolerance. The evening took a turn for the worse when Mrs. Whitmore demanded, "Clean the toilet." "What? Now?" I was aghast. "Yes, now," she insisted, her voice dripping with venom. I snapped back, unable to contain my frustration. "Don't say such a thing while we're eating. It's nasty." "Just like your heart," she hissed. Our argument escalated quickly, with Alex interjecting, demanding I apologize to his mother. But I refused, standing my ground for the first time in years. The conflict reached its peak, and in that moment, a decision crystallized within me. I needed to escape this toxic environment, not just for my sake, but for my son's as well. I retreated to my room, my resolve hardening. I downloaded divorce papers, filled them out, and slammed them in front of Alex. His shock was palpable, but I felt nothing but a cold determination. "I'm filing these," I declared, my voice steady. As I stood there facing my husband's bewildered expression, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to reclaim my life. The days following my declaration of divorce were a whirlwind of cold glares and biting remarks. But amidst this storm, I found an unfamiliar sense of liberation. One evening, as I served dinner, Mrs. Whitmore looked at the meal with disdain. "You call this food? Even a child cooks better." I bit my tongue, focusing on my son's smiling face. "Eat up, sweetheart. I made your favorite tonight." Alex chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, playing the perfect mother now, are we? What a joke." I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, but I kept my composure. "I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son." Mrs. Whitmore snorted. "Don't act high and mighty. You're just a burden in this house." The tension at the table was palpable. Alex's attempts to belittle me only intensified. "So, Alara, have you thought about how you'll survive after the divorce? You can barely keep a house, let alone your own life." I looked him straight in the eye. "I have been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself and our son." His smirk faded slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Mrs. Whitmore quickly intervened. "Don't be absurd. You need us more than we need you." The conversation turned to finances, a topic they usually avoided. "You do realize that without my salary, this household would crumble?" I stated, more to myself than to them. Mrs. Whitmore scoffed. "We'll manage. We don't need your pity money." But Alex's silence spoke volumes. He knew the truth. Without my income, they would be in dire straits. In the following days, their behavior became increasingly erratic. Mrs. Whitmore would oscillate between trying to sweet-talk me into staying and hurling insults when I didn't comply. Alex, on the other hand, seemed lost, his arrogant facade crumbling as the reality of his financial dependence became undeniable. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them that chilled me to the bone. "She can't leave us like this," Alex hissed. "We need her money." Mrs. Whitmore's reply was cold and calculated. "Don't worry. I have a plan. We'll make her life so miserable she won't dare to leave." Hearing their true intentions laid bare was a revelation. They didn't care about me or even our son. It was all about control and money. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one. But it wouldn't be fought with words or petty arguments. I would hit them where it hurt the most, their pride and their pockets. The next morning, I started putting my plan into action. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who came highly recommended. "I want a divorce, and I want to make sure they don't get a penny more than they deserve," I told her. She nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "We'll make sure of that. You've been the sole breadwinner, right? We'll use that." As the days passed, my resolve only grew stronger. I started documenting everything, the insults, the financial manipulation, even the smallest of grievances. It was time to turn the tables. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. And as I built my case, a sense of empowerment filled me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The shadows of contempt were slowly lifting, and in their place, a new dawn was emerging. As the divorce proceedings began, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly toxic. Yet, with each passing day, my sense of fear diminished, replaced by a steely resolve. One evening, Mrs. Whitmore tried a different tactic. "Alara, dear, why don't we forget all this nasty business? You know we're family." Her words dripped with insincerity. I met her gaze, unwavering. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me." Alex, who had been quietly observing, scoffed. "Oh, playing the victim now? You're not as innocent as you pretend to be." I felt a surge of anger, but kept my voice calm. "I'm not playing anything, Alex. I'm just no longer willing to be your scapegoat." The conversation turned, as it often did, to finances. "You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him?" Alex challenged. I smiled, a small, confident curve of my lips. "I've been supporting this family for years. I think I can manage." Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into a sneer. You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back. But their words no longer held power over me. I knew my worth, and I knew the truth. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. She laid out the strategy clearly. We'll expose their financial dependency on you. It will play a crucial role in the custody battle and the division of assets. I nodded, feeling a sense of vindication. The law was on my side, and I was ready to fight. Back at home, the tension reached a boiling point. Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to undermine me became more desperate. You think you're so smart, she spat one evening. But you're just a cold-hearted woman, abandoning your family. I looked her straight in the eyes. No, I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself. Alex jumped in, his voice laced with venom. You'll regret this. You can't survive without me. But his threats fell on deaf ears. I was done being intimidated. As the days went by, my preparations for the court battle intensified. I gathered financial statements, recorded their abusive remarks, and collected evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I was organizing my documents, my son came to me. Mom, are we going to be okay? His voice was small, uncertain. I pulled him into a hug, feeling a surge of protectiveness. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life. Just you and me. His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. I was fighting, not just for myself, but for my son's future. The day of the court hearing loomed closer, and with it, a sense of impending freedom. I was ready to face Alex and Mrs. Whitmore, ready to end their reign of control and emotional abuse. I was ready to reclaim my life and give my son the peace and happiness he deserved. It was time for justice, and I was determined to see it served. The day of the court hearing arrived, a day I had been anticipating with a mix of dread and determination. As I sat across from Alex and Mrs. Whitmore in the courtroom, I felt a sense of surrealism. This was the moment where everything would change. The proceedings began with a cold formality. Alex's lawyer portrayed him as a devoted husband and father, struggling under the weight of false accusations. Mrs. Whitmore played the part of the grieving mother-in-law, wronged by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. But their performance was transparent, their lies brittle. When my turn came, I spoke clearly, my voice steady. I have been the sole provider for this family for years. My husband's unemployment and his mother's manipulation have been constant sources of strain. Alex interjected, his voice laced with false hurt. Alara, how can you say these things? I've always supported you. I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. Support is more than just words, Alex. It's about actions, and your actions have shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. The judge listened intently as I presented my evidence. Financial statements, recordings of their verbal abuse, testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed their behavior. The truth was undeniable. As the evidence mounted, Alex's facade began to crumble. Mrs. Whitmore's composure cracked, her mask of innocence slipping away. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Then came the revelation that sealed their fate. My lawyer presented photographs and documents proving Alex's infidelity and Mrs. Whitmore's illicit affair with a wealthy neighbor, Mr. Harwood. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the images were displayed, showing them in compromising positions, their deception laid bare for all to see. Alex's face turned ashen, his eyes wide with shock. Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into one of fury, her hands trembling. You invaded our privacy. Mrs. Whitmore shrieked, her voice shrill. I looked at her, my voice calm but firm. No, I exposed the truth, a truth that you both have been hiding for too long. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Their credibility was shattered, their lies exposed in the harsh light of the courtroom. As the hearing came to a close, the judge's verdict was clear. I was granted full custody of our son, and a fair division of assets was ordered. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were left with little more than their shattered reputations. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The years of manipulation and emotional abuse were finally over. I had stood up to my oppressors and emerged victorious. But the sweetest moment came when my son ran into my arms outside the courthouse, his face bright with relief and happiness. "We did it, Mom," he said, his voice filled with joy. "Yes, we did," I replied, holding him close. "We're free now. It's just the beginning for us." And as we walked away, hand in hand, I knew that this was not just a victory for me. It was a victory for every person who had ever been made to feel small, powerless, or unworthy. It was a victory for truth and justice. It was the start of a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. The aftermath of the court ruling was immediate and tumultuous. Word of Alex and Mrs. Whitmore's deceit spread like wildfire, tarnishing their reputations in our small community. They were no longer able to hide behind their facade of respectability. In the days following the verdict, I focused on rebuilding my life with my son, but I couldn't ignore the sense of satisfaction that came from knowing Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were facing the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Mr. Harwood's wife, Mrs. Harwood, her eyes red with unshed tears. "Alara, I heard about everything. I can't believe what Sylvia, Mrs. Whitmore, did." Her voice broke, and I could see the pain etched on her face. I invited her in, offering a cup of tea. As we sat at the kitchen table, she poured out her heartache. I trusted her as a neighbor, as a friend, and to think she was having an affair with my husband. I listened, offering words of comfort. It was clear that Mrs. Whitmore's actions had caused more damage than she had ever anticipated. The next day I encountered Alex in town. He was a shadow of the man he once was, his arrogance replaced by a look of defeat. "Alara, please, can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stopped, facing him. "What is there to talk about, Alex?" He fidgeted, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much I depended on you, on your strength." His apology, though late, was a testament to the shift in power. He had lost everything, his dignity, his home, his family, and in that loss he had finally recognized his own faults. But it was Mrs. Whitmore who faced the harshest backlash. Her affair with Mr. Harwood had not only ruined her reputation, but had also led to legal troubles. Mrs. Harwood had filed for divorce and was pursuing a lawsuit against her for alienation of affection. I heard about Mrs. Whitmore's plight from neighbors, the whispers and rumors painting a picture of a woman undone by her own actions. She had become an outcast, shunned by those she had once considered friends. One afternoon, I saw her at the grocery store, her eyes downcast as she hurried through the aisles. Our paths crossed, and for a moment our eyes met. The look of resentment and defeat in her eyes was unmistakable. "You did this to me," she hissed under her breath as she passed by. I watched her go, feeling a mix of pity and vindication. "No, Sylvia, you did this to yourself," I whispered to myself. The tides of justice had turned, and the consequences of their actions were now inescapable. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were living the life they had crafted through years of deceit and manipulation. And as I watched them struggle with the aftermath, I knew that the best revenge was living well, free from their toxic influence. As I turned my focus back to my son and our new life, I realized that this was not just a story of revenge. It was a story of liberation, of breaking free from the chains of abuse and control. And as I looked to the future, I knew that the best was yet to come.